The millionaire everyone feared and envied was on his knees, hands trembling as they touched the cold stone. Rain plastered his expensive coat to his skin. His polished image was dissolving with every uncontrollable sob. "Lila," his voice cracked, swallowed by the silence. "I'm so sorry." Apologies for missed birthdays, for ignored calls, for choosing money over time. He pressed his forehead to the gravestone as if the stone could forgive him. And there my breath caught, because she wasn't dead. She stood across the cemetery, hidden behind the trees, watching every tear, every falter, every silent confession. The grave beneath him was a lie. His daughter wasn't dead. She was alive, and she was watching him from across the cemetery, frozen in place, tears streaming down her face as her father mourned a loss that never truly happened. The grave he was kneeling beside was built on a lie. I held my breath, watching a man finally feel the pain he'd ignored for years, watching a daughter fight the urge to run to him, watching karma circle quietly, patiently, waiting for the right moment to strike. And as the rain fell harder, one thought echoed louder in my mind than his cries. This story was never just about a grave. It was about betrayal, silence, and a truth that refused to stay buried. I wasn't family. I wasn't a friend, and I certainly wasn't supposed to be standing there watching one of the most powerful men in the city fall apart at a grave that shouldn't have existed. I was there because I had been there from the beginning, because some stories don't let you walk away once you've seen too much. I had crossed paths with this family years ago, long before the headlines, long before the fire, long before the world decided a young woman had died tragically and quietly. Back then, I was just someone on the edges, close enough to notice details, distant enough to be ignored. I remembered the father before grief softened him, back when his voice never trembled, back when his phone was always more important than the girl standing in front of him. I remembered how rooms went silent when he entered, how people bent around his presence. Power did that to him. It insulated him, made him believe nothing important could happen without his permission. That morning at the cemetery, I stayed hidden behind a row of trees, watching him talk to the gravestone like it was a confessional. Every word he spoke landed heavy in my chest because I knew the truth he didn't. I knew why his guilt had come too late, and I knew who had benefited most from his daughter being declared dead.
The rain blurred my vision, but not my memory. I could still see the night everything changed. The firelight, the confusion, the way the story had been shaped before the smoke even cleared. Standing there now, I realized something chilling. This grave wasn't just a place of mourning. It was proof of how easily truth could be buried when money decided the narrative. And as I watched him whisper apologies to stone and dirt, I knew this was only the beginning, because the woman who caused all of this was still free, still protected, still living comfortably off a lie. And karma, I had learned, never forgets an address. If this story is pulling you in, subscribe to the channel, like this video, and comment the name of your city below. Your support keeps these stories alive and the truth moving forward. Before the grave, before the headlines, before the quiet sobs soaked into wet soil, he was untouchable. I remember him in tailored suits that cost more than most people's yearly rent, his presence filling every room before his voice ever did. He didn't walk, he arrived. Conversations stopped when he entered, deals were decided by a nod, lives altered by a glance. And his daughter? She was always just there, orbiting his world, never at the center of it. I saw it the first time I met her. She stood slightly behind him, clutching a notebook to her chest like armor, eyes scanning the room instead of demanding it. She smiled when people praised her father, not herself. She had learned early that admiration flowed in one direction in that family, and it wasn't toward her. He loved her, I think, in the way powerful men convince themselves they do. He provided everything money could buy: schools, tutors, security, silence. But time, attention, protection from the people closest to him, those were luxuries he never learned to give. The night before the fire, I saw them argue. Not loudly, not dramatically, just enough tension to change the air. She wanted something, freedom maybe, or truth. He wanted compliance, he always did. And when she walked away from him that night, shoulders squared but hands shaking, something inside me whispered that this wasn't over. Then the fire happened. The story spread fast, faster than facts ever do. A tragic accident, a faulty wire, a young woman asleep in her room. The city mourned, the media printed his grief like a headline, donations poured in, sympathy wrapped itself around him like a shield.
But I was there when the report changed, when details disappeared, when questions were labeled disrespectful. I saw how quickly power can erase uncertainty, how grief, when paired with wealth, becomes unchallengeable. Standing at her grave years later, watching him break in ways the world never saw, I understood the cruel symmetry of it all. He was finally feeling what she had felt her entire life, unheard, helpless, and alone. And somewhere far away, the woman who made sure the fire's truth never surfaced was sleeping peacefully, convinced she had won. She hadn't. Not yet. The fire didn't start with flames. It started with silence. I was already awake when my phone rang. Too late, too urgent, the kind of call that rearranges your spine before you even answer. Smoke, they said. An accident. His house. Her room. By the time I arrived, the street was blocked with flashing lights and neighbors wrapped in blankets, whispering like grief was contagious. The house still stood, mostly. That was the first thing that didn't make sense. Fires that kill don't usually spare so much. The damage was concentrated, precise, almost contained. I remember thinking that and then immediately feeling guilty for noticing details while everyone else was crying. He arrived minutes later, barefoot, coat thrown over his shoulders like an afterthought. He didn't scream, didn't ask questions. He just stared at the house as if it had betrayed him personally. When someone said her name, his face didn't collapse the way you'd expect. It hardened, as if his mind was already moving somewhere else, somewhere strategic. They didn't let us inside, but I saw enough through the open door. Her room looked disturbed, not destroyed. Furniture shifted, a window cracked open just enough to let smoke escape. I remember the smell, not burning wood, but something sharper, chemical, wrong. By dawn, the narrative was already in place. Faulty wiring, tragic timing, a young woman overcome by smoke before she could wake. The words moved faster than the investigation ever could. Press statements were drafted, lawyers arrived before forensic teams finished their coffee. And then there was her stepmother. She stood apart from the chaos, phone pressed to her ear, voice low and calm. No tears, no shaking hands, just efficiency. When she noticed me watching, her eyes flicked toward me, cold, measuring. In that moment, I felt it in my gut. This wasn't shock. This was control. By the end of the day, the fire had a cause, the death had a time, and the family had a future to protect. Questions became inconveniences, curiosity became disrespect, and anyone who pushed too hard was gently, expensively silenced. But what haunted me most wasn't the speed of the cover-up. It was the fact that no one ever showed me a body. Funerals are supposed to bring closure. This one brought questions. The casket was closed, sealed under the excuse of damage too severe for viewing. People nodded, accepted it, cried anyway. Grief makes compliance easy. I stood in the back, hands folded, watching the stepmother accept condolences with practiced grace, her black dress immaculate, her mascara untouched.
not a woman who had lost a child, one who had survived a negotiation. After the service, I wandered toward the edge of the property where discarded items waited to be cataloged. That's when I saw it. Her bracelet. Thin silver chain, small star charm bent at the edge. She never took it off, not sleeping, not showering. It had been found in the hallway, untouched by soot. If she'd been in her room, the bracelet would have melted, warped, gone. Instead, it looked placed. I asked about it, casually, too casually. The officer's smile stiffened, and someone else stepped in to answer for him. That was my second red flag. You don't replace people mid-sentence unless there's something you don't want finished. Days later, the house was cleared, cleaned, renovated, memory erased with fresh paint and contractors who didn't ask questions. Her room was redesigned entirely, as if she'd never existed. And still, no medical examiner would speak directly to me. Reports were summarized, never shown. Every answer felt pre-approved. I tried reaching out to people who knew her best, friends, teachers, her therapist. Each conversation ended the same way. Nervous pauses, sudden excuses, calls never returned. Someone was warning them, or paying them, or both. Then came the message. An empty email. No subject, no text, just an attachment. A photo. Grainy. Taken at night. A young woman wrapped in a blanket, face partially turned away, standing beside a familiar car. Her posture was unmistakable, the slight tilt of her head when she was exhausted but alert, alive. At the bottom of the photo, a single line. Stop looking. My hands shook, not from fear, but from certainty. They hadn't buried a daughter. They had buried the truth. I didn't reply to the message. Silence, I had learned, makes liars uncomfortable. Instead, I studied the photo until my eyes ached. The car in the background wasn't random. It was hers, the stepmother's. Same dent near the rear light, same custom plate frame. That detail alone told me everything I needed to know. If the girl was alive, she hadn't escaped. She had been removed. I tested the waters carefully. A casual mention here, an innocent question there. Every time her name surfaced, the stepmother appeared, redirecting, correcting, smoothing things over like a publicist managing a scandal. She spoke of grief often, but never of loss. There's a difference. Grief sounds messy. Loss sounds permanent. Her words were always too neat. Then came the warning, delivered in person. She invited me for coffee. Public place, afternoon, smiling. She spoke about healing, about moving on, about how some stories are dangerous when people don't understand the full picture. Her hand rested lightly on her cup as she leaned in, voice lowering just enough to feel intimate. "You don't want to ruin your life chasing ghosts," she said softly. I looked at her and realized something chilling. She truly believed this was over, that money, influence, and time had erased risk. She thought I was another loose end that could be tucked away with a gentle threat and a sympathetic smile. That night, I found another envelope taped to my door. Inside was a check, a number with more zeros than my annual income, and a note written in her precise handwriting. "For your peace." I laughed out loud, not because it was funny, but because it confirmed everything. Innocent people don't buy silence, and powerful women don't get sloppy unless they're scared. I tore the check in half. The next morning, the locks on my apartment were changed, and that's when I realized this was no longer about uncovering the truth. This was about survival. I didn't know where to start. The photo gave me a clue, but nothing more. The stepmother's car was everywhere. Neighborhoods, parking lots, hotel valet lots. It appeared when it shouldn't. Someone was moving her carefully, like a shadow protecting a secret. I tracked patterns, times, locations, small habits I remembered from before the death. Every detail mattered. And finally, after weeks of careful observation, I saw her, alive, breathing, standing in the doorway of a tiny apartment in a neighborhood she'd always loved as a child. No guards, no cameras, no one else, just her. She hadn't run away. She hadn't sought freedom. She had stayed hidden, meticulously, afraid that one wrong step would bring the same people who orchestrated her death back into her life. And yet, she wasn't afraid of me. She looked at me with recognition, relief, a quiet gratitude that I hadn't come with a camera, a phone, or a recorder. We didn't speak at first. I waited, watching her move with the caution of someone who had been forced to survive in a world that told her she didn't exist. Her hands trembled, not from fear, but from the weight of years she had been forced to endure alone. Finally, she spoke, her voice low, trembling but determined. "If he sees me, everything will fall apart. Everything I survived will mean nothing. He's a good man, but he's fragile, and everyone around him, they're predators." That's when I understood her fear. This wasn't just about revenge or closure. This was about control, survival, and timing. And I realized that helping her meant I had to be careful. Every step, every word, every move could expose her and undo years of calculated secrecy. I made a promise to myself that day. We would fix this, slowly, quietly, and when the moment came, the truth would strike with precision. From a distance, I watched him, every week, every visit. Rain, shine, snow, he came to that grave as if it were a tether to something he had lost forever. I saw the cracks forming in the man who once seemed untouchable. His suits no longer fit perfectly, his hair less polished, his hands trembling as they traced the engraved letters on the stone. He talked to her, begged for forgiveness, told her he was sorry for every small thing he had ignored, every moment he had chosen money over her. And I watched my friend, alive, breathing, hold herself still, restrained, knowing that one misstep could destroy all the careful secrecy she had maintained. She wanted to run to him, to scream that she was here, but she couldn't. Not yet. Every day I saw him break a little more, nights without sleep, calls left unanswered, dinners he couldn't finish. Friends started noticing. Staff whispered about a change. Even the city that adored him began to see him as a man unraveling. He was consumed by guilt, by regret, by the haunting thought that he had buried his own child. And the worst part? The stepmother's influence continued, even from a distance. She smiled in public, controlled the narrative, and made sure the world only saw a grieving father, not a man being destroyed by truth. But the cracks were spreading. Power, influence, money, they couldn't shield him from the raw force of a father realizing he had failed the one person who had loved him unconditionally. I felt a strange mix of satisfaction and sorrow. Satisfaction because justice, in its slowest form, was taking hold. Sorrow because I had to watch a man suffer before the revelation, even knowing he had contributed to his daughter's suffering by neglect and absence. Every tear he shed was proof of what had been denied for years, proof that some truths are too heavy to ignore forever. And then, one morning, I saw her make a decision, the first of many, the first small step that would change everything. She was no longer just hiding. She was planning, watching, waiting, calculating.
It started small, a misplaced document, an overlooked email, a whispered confession to the wrong person. I noticed it first, scanning through the layers of deception that had kept her hidden for so long. The stepmother had been meticulous, careful, calculating, ruthless, but no plan is perfect. Everyone slips, everyone forgets, everyone makes a mistake eventually. One afternoon, I intercepted a financial report meant for her private attorney. It was innocuous at first glance, just numbers, accounts, transfers, but hidden within the spreadsheets were patterns that didn't add up. Money moved from accounts she controlled directly into emergency funds with no explanation, accounts she claimed she didn't use, and dates that coincided suspiciously with the fire, the so-called accident, the immediate aftermath. I remember my hands shaking as I realized what this meant. The stepmother hadn't just survived the fire, she had benefited from it. She had positioned herself to profit while a child, alive but hidden, remained a ghost in the world. I showed her, the daughter, watching silently. Her eyes hardened. Years of fear, of forced invisibility, turned into resolute. "This is it," she whispered. "This is the moment to take the first step, carefully, quietly, but firmly."
We didn't rush. The father was still consumed by grief. He still believed she was gone. He cried openly at the grave, pouring all the emotion he should have shared when she was alive. And yet, every tear he shed made the eventual reveal even more potent. Karma, I thought, had a patient hand. I set up small tests, calls to the wrong numbers, inquiries that would rattle her carefully constructed world, leaving subtle hints that someone was paying attention. And then just enough evidence leaked to the right people to make her nervous. The first crack appeared in her flawless armor. I could see it in her eyes before she even spoke. The stepmother had always been composed, calculating, untouchable. But now a flicker of fear danced across her carefully crafted facade. A simple phone call, a vague question from someone in her inner circle, and she froze. Her polished smile faltered for a fraction of a second, the tiniest crack that betrayed the confidence she so often wielded like armor. From that moment, I knew her control was slipping. Every movement she made now was too precise, too calculated. She double-checked everything, questioned every assistant, scrutinized every document, and yet she couldn't undo the subtle pressures we had begun applying. Evidence was everywhere, yet just out of reach, like shadows teasing her in the corners of her empire. Her panic was quiet at first, internal, but it grew. Meetings became tense, calls ended abruptly, and her assistants started whispering about mistakes she had never made before. It was thrilling and terrifying to watch her crumble from a position that had always seemed untouchable. The woman who had orchestrated so much chaos now felt the weight of her own schemes pressing down. And all the while, the father remained unaware. He still knelt at the grave, sobbing, believing his daughter was lost forever. He never suspected that the woman he trusted most, the one he allowed to guide his family in his absence, was the architect of so much deceit. His heartbreak, so genuine, made the stepmother's unraveling even sweeter in a silent, karmic sort of justice. Finally, after weeks of careful observation, the first real opportunity presented itself. She made a mistake, a financial slip so glaring it couldn't be explained away, and that slip opened the door wide enough for us to start reclaiming the truth, piece by piece. The moment she slipped, I knew we had to act quickly. Time was crucial. One wrong move and years of careful hiding could vanish, and the truth would be buried forever again. I began collecting every scrap of evidence, documents, emails, bank transfers, receipts, even conversations she thought were private. Every piece told a story she had hoped would never be told. The daughter stayed close, watching, learning, and finally finding her own voice in the process.
She had spent years hiding in fear, but now she whispered plans, observations, and corrections that only someone who lived the lie could know. Every small detail became a weapon, every memory a piece of the puzzle. I remember the first time we presented a fragment of the proof to an outside source, a lawyer we could trust, someone unconnected to the family. He paused, read carefully, and leaned back slowly. This is undeniable, he said, and for the first time I felt that long-delayed sense of justice beginning to take root. We didn't rush. The father was still broken, still kneeling at the grave most days, unaware of the storm about to hit. But every report, every verified document, every connection made brought us closer to a day where the truth would no longer be a secret. Karma, quiet and patient, was moving. And the stepmother? She was panicking now, feeling the walls closing in but not understanding where the pressure was coming from. She didn't see us yet, didn't know her carefully orchestrated world was about to collapse. And the daughter? She had never felt more alive. It started with a phone call, one we knew she would answer. Calmly, I spoke, careful to keep my tone neutral, almost casual. I mentioned a few discrepancies she hadn't noticed yet, minor ones, but enough to make a sharp woman like her pause. She laughed at first, a soft, dismissive sound. "You're imagining things," she said, her voice smooth, almost rehearsed. But the pause after she spoke, that microsecond of hesitation told me everything. She had noticed. She knew something was wrong. We pushed carefully, just enough to let her feel the pressure without alerting her completely. I didn't need her to confess yet. I only needed her to crack, and she did. Subtle at first, missed details, contradictions in her explanations, tense shoulders. I could see her carefully constructed armor starting to buckle. The daughter watched from across the room, her hands tight around a cup of tea. She stayed silent, knowing that patience now would give the payoff later. Years of hiding had taught her the value of timing. And as we ended that first conversation, I realized something terrifying and exhilarating. The stepmother had underestimated us. She believed the past was buried, the daughter gone, and the father blind. She had counted on complacency, but she had forgotten one key truth. Secrets don't last forever, and lies have a way of finding the light. It started slowly, almost imperceptibly, a whisper here, a leaked document there. People who had been loyal to her began asking questions. Friends, colleagues, even some of her trusted staff started noticing inconsistencies that couldn't be explained away. The cracks in her perfect life widened. One morning, I received a call from someone inside her inner circle, a voice trembling yet eager to share what had been hidden. "She's panicking," they said. "Things are going wrong and she doesn't know why." I smiled quietly. Karma, patient and relentless, was finally making its presence felt. The first public sign came when an investigative journalist picked up on a financial anomaly linked to her. It wasn't much, just a small transfer that didn't match her statements, but it was enough to spark questions, enough for doubt to creep into the narrative she had carefully maintained. And once doubt starts, it multiplies quickly. Meanwhile, the daughter remained hidden, observing everything. She watched the woman who had tried to erase her existence squirm, realizing the power she had once feared was shifting back to the right hands. For the first time in years, the daughter felt hope, a quiet, dangerous hope. And the father? He still visited the grave, unaware of the storm that was about to break. Every tear he shed, every whispered apology, unknowingly fueled the coming justice. One day soon, he would finally see her, and when he did, the truth would hit like lightning, with consequences no one could ignore. We knew timing was everything. The daughter couldn't just appear. She had to choose the moment, one where the stepmother's influence would be minimized and the father's reaction could be fully felt. Every detail mattered: where she would stand, what she would say, how she would move. I helped her rehearse silently.
Not lines, but reactions, how to handle the shock, the flood of emotion, the questions she knew would come. She had spent years hiding in fear, and now every movement, every breath had to be deliberate. She had to protect herself, but also reclaim the narrative of her own life. Meanwhile, I observed the father closely. Every visit to the grave, every tear, every whispered apology became a map of emotion. I needed to understand him fully, not just as a man, but as a father, so the moment she appeared would hit with the force it deserved. The stepmother was oblivious. She remained focused on control, on maintaining appearances. She believed the daughter's disappearance had secured her dominance. Little did she know, the pieces were moving beyond her reach. Every slip, every mistake, every overlooked detail had shifted the balance. By the end of that week, we were ready. The daughter's presence would be undeniable. The evidence collected over months would support the truth. And the stepmother? She wouldn't see it coming. Karma, patient and precise, had finally set the stage. It was a quiet morning, the kind where the world feels paused, as if waiting for something monumental to happen. The father arrived at the grave, unhurried but heavy with grief as always. His hands were trembling slightly, and the rain had left the stone cold beneath his palms. He didn't know it yet, but today would be different. I watched from a distance, heart pounding. The daughter had left a single token, a small charm identical to one he had given her years ago. She placed it carefully near the gravestone, half buried in mud as if to test him. Not too obvious, not too revealing, just enough to create curiosity, to awaken a flicker of hope. He noticed it immediately. His head shot up, eyes scanning the ground, confused. His lips moved, forming her name almost in disbelief. He bent closer, brushing mud from the charm, trembling so violently it made me catch my breath. This was the first undeniable sign, proof that the narrative he had been sold for years was a lie. The stepmother was nowhere near him. She hadn't anticipated this subtle move, this quiet reclamation of truth, and that oversight was crucial. She had prepared for confrontation, not subtle hints. She had calculated everything, but underestimated patience and precision. And the daughter? She watched, hidden behind trees, tears streaming. Years of fear, isolation, and longing condensed into this single moment of triumph. She was alive. He would find out, and justice, slow, methodical, inevitable, was about to unfold. It didn't take long for her to sense something was wrong. She walked into the office later that day, perfectly composed as always, and immediately noticed the unease in her assistants. Subtle gestures, whispered words, eyes darting toward her. The cracks she had ignored for so long were no longer invisible. Her phone rang, a single call, vague but urgent. "You need to see this," the voice said. It was a message she couldn't ignore. The charm, the subtle evidence placed by the daughter, had reached someone in her inner circle. Someone had questioned the inconsistencies. Someone had started connecting dots she assumed were safely buried. I watched her for hours, quietly, studying her reactions. Panic didn't hit immediately. She hid it behind a veneer of control, just like she always did. But the tension in her shoulders, the quickness of her movements, the way she scanned every document twice, 3 times, it was there. Panic had arrived. She realized her mistake too late. Every move she had calculated to maintain dominance, to control the narrative, had been outmaneuvered by patience, precision, and truth. Her world, once untouchable, had begun to crumble in ways she could not anticipate. And as I observed, I felt the weight of inevitability settle over us. The father would soon know, the daughter would step out of the shadows, and the stepmother, for all her cunning, would finally face the consequences of the lies she had built her life upon. The day came quietly, almost unassumingly. The father approached the grave as he always did, rain falling lightly, clouds heavy with anticipation he didn't yet feel. He knelt, hands trembling, murmuring her name. I watched from a distance,
heart pounding, knowing the moment we had waited for was finally here.
She stepped forward slowly, deliberately, making sure the charm he had discovered remained visible. Her eyes met his from afar, and for a heartbeat he froze. Confusion, disbelief, hope, all flashed across his face in a single, painful instant. He whispered her name again, voice shaking. "Is it really you?" Tears streamed down her face as she ran to him. He rose unsteadily, reaching out, unable to believe what his eyes were seeing. The daughter he thought lost was alive, right in front of him. The grave that had been a symbol of lies, of deception, now seemed absurd, irrelevant in the presence of truth. The stepmother arrived moments later, too late to intervene. She saw the reunion, the father overwhelmed with joy, the daughter reclaiming her life, the truth finally exposed, and panic overtook her. All the control, all the schemes collapsed in front of her. She tried to speak, to explain, to manipulate, but no one was listening. Karma, patient and precise, had delivered its reckoning. I stood back, silently observing as father and daughter embraced, years of separation, pain, and misunderstanding melting away. The stepmother's silence, her powerless stance, said everything. Justice had arrived, not with violence, but with timing, truth, and patience. The reunion sent shockwaves through everyone involved. The father, overwhelmed with relief and joy, could hardly speak. He clung to his daughter, asking endless questions, wanting to know how she had survived, why no one had told him, and who had orchestrated the deception. The stepmother's world crumbled around her. People she had relied upon for loyalty began turning away, fearful of being associated with lies and manipulation. Her influence, built over years of calculated control, evaporated almost overnight. Lawyers and business associates distanced themselves. Her empire, carefully constructed on deceit, was now riddled with cracks she couldn't repair. The daughter, now empowered, worked carefully to reclaim her life. She had endured years of isolation and fear, but now she had a voice, agency, and the support of the father she thought she had lost. Slowly, she began to rebuild what had been taken from her: trust, freedom, and the ability to live openly again. The father, once consumed by grief, now faced the challenge of reconciling the past with the present. His heartbreak had been real, but so had the joy of rediscovery. And through it all, he learned a hard lesson: that wealth and power cannot shield you from the consequences of negligence, and that love, once neglected, can return, but only with patience, humility, and acknowledgement of mistakes. And the stepmother? She was left alone, exposed, and powerless. Her manipulation had failed, her lies unraveled, and the very family she sought to control now rejected her. Karma, patient and inevitable, had completed its work. The day the truth fully settled, the family gathered, not for grief, but for healing. The father and daughter stood together, stronger for the trials they had endured. Tears still came, but now they were tears of relief, gratitude, and the quiet satisfaction of justice finally served. The stepmother was absent, forced into isolation by her own actions. Her influence had vanished. Friends, colleagues, even distant acquaintances now refused her calls. Every attempt to regain control was met with resistance or indifference. She had built her life on manipulation and lies, and the consequences were absolute. She was a reminder that no amount of power can protect someone from the inevitable return of truth. The daughter, resilient and wise beyond her years, began reclaiming her life openly. She no longer feared shadows or silence. Each moment she spent with her father was a reclamation of the love and trust stolen from her. Every hug, every laugh, every conversation was a testament to the strength of patience and the power of perseverance. I watched quietly, knowing my role was complete. I had helped guide the truth, but it was karma that had orchestrated the perfect balance. Justice hadn't come violently or cruelly. It had come precisely, inevitably, like a tide no one could stop. And for the first time in years, the father could look at his daughter without the weight of guilt crushing him, knowing that love, however delayed, had returned. The story ended where it should have. The innocent reclaimed their life, the guilty faced consequences, and the world, in its quiet way, restored balance. Karma had spoken, and it was absolute.